Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today, we have Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this morning?
Doing good.
Good.
Quite well.
Good.
Ready and raring to go.
Okay.
And I want to start off with our first item. There is some firing going on, but we can't identify who did the firing and when did she get the pink slip. But anyway, CDC Director Susan Maneras is ousted in vaccine policy clash with RFK. And I'm thinking about what's going on here. That was along with four other CDC officials. So it's a big deal. But I see this as a continuation of a rebellion that went on with COVID. You know, it was so outrageous, it was typical, but they overstepped their bounds on the pharmaceutical industry, and there's still a lot of people learning how bad it was. And so I keep mentioning, you know, that when the people woke up, you know, then the support for that whole program, was stimulated. And yet there's still a lot of anti-sentiment with these vaccines. But it looks like there were these individuals, and the CDC director actually there, and she was a true believer. And all of a sudden, after 1 month, she's gone. So I would say the sentiment that was born and bred with extremism of the worst kind, when a government takes over all the control of individuals and keeping people in their houses, telling them how to raise their kids and who should see, what medicines they could take, what doctors they could see. It's an outrage. But this is I think, a continuation of that philosophic fight. Who's supposed to be in charge of our children? Who's supposed to be in charge of our medical care? And I think I would have to think that Robert Kennedy, has to be, up on this. Exactly how it came about, I don't know. But it is a significant event, and I think it's an event for a continuation of people waking up on who should be in charge of their medical care. And it's not the CDC, it's not the government, it's the people themselves, the consumer, the patients, and especially the parents.
You know, Dr. Paul, we do try to look for positive stories. We know we've been critical of some of the things, particularly some of the foreign policy things that President Trump has done, within the last couple of months or so. Some economic stuff, too, like the big, beautiful bill. But we do try to find something positive, and we've talked a couple times about how Tulsi is doing a pretty good job cleaning things out at the Director of National Intelligence Office, and that's great. So here we have a story today that I think is also a good news story, which is that it seems, at least from the surface, that RFK Jr. is cleaning up things at HHS, particularly CDC. Now, CDC, remember, Dr. Paul, we were here talking about it till we were blue in the face. They were notoriously authoritarian during COVID. They finally came into their own. You could see it. They loved the power. And they wanted it both ways, too, because if you remember, on the one hand, they'd say, oh, we're not making laws. We're just making recommendations. And then every business would be forced to follow these recommendations, and they were all wrong. They all turned out wrong. So I think their credibility is already very, very damaged, which is a good thing. But if you go to that first clip, now you see a shift in the vaccine, apparently a shift in the vaccine requirements. So here's, you read the article, Dr. Paul, the title. She was ousted after just 4 weeks as head of CDC. The details are a little bit sketchy, but if you go to the next one, she's obviously not the right person for the job. If you care about the CDC going back to being less authoritarian, the ex-accountant died suddenly. Push published a profile of Maneras, offering readers a snapshot of her background and political leanings. And this is from that ex-account. Susan Maneras was fired as CDC director for trying to keep mRNA shots on the recommended childhood vaccine schedule and saying vaccines save lives. Maneras has a long history of connections to, get this, Dr. Paul, Bill Gates and his foundation, such as her time at Stanford for postdoctoral research, where she worked in a department chaired by Mark Davis, who went on to receive a $50 million grant from Gates before the pandemic to create vaccines and found the university's Human Systems Immunology Center. Menard also served as deputy director of ARPA under Bison and oversaw a partnership with biotech firm called Ginkgo Bioworks. This firm was underwritten by a Gates-controlled investment firm, Cascade Investment. So the short version, Dr. Paul, is she's up to her eyebrows in Bill Gates. And if you believe in parental control with your doctors of your child, Bill Gates is not your friend.
That's for sure. You know, I often try to figure out the motivations of people who preach and practice and use authority, the government, and financial means to promote such a thing as the COVID thing. But I think it's incremental. I think most of them are sincere. The government has to take care of us on infectious diseases, and people accept that. So I think there's a lot of good motives. But I also think there's something else that creeps in leaderships and lets it go haywire. And that to me is money. I think, it's easy to talk about the military industrial complex, but it's also getting easier to talk about the pharmaceutical industrial complex. And there's a lot of money involved in this stuff. And it also represents another example of corporatism. You know, medicine, I don't think I found it in the Constitution where it says the federal government is in charge of all inoculations and all medical care. I mean, it's just not there. And so we've developed this system of corporatism because in this system we have, if you have a loud enough noise and voice and you can support candidates that go along with this, it's a form of corporatism because the corporations are making these decisions. And then we say, well, you know, Bill Gates, isn't he a good free market guy? He's a corporate. He's involved in supply and demand, but he's also involved in corporatism and political power. So this to me is just another example of once you start. You know, how long has the government been? Oh, a long time in medicine. But this was the most atrocious, apparent goof off, that the people finally woke up and they brought this to a so-called end. But unfortunately, it's still there. But I think this is very symbolic of maybe they should put a stamp on this and say, why did we ever do it?
Yeah.
It didn't work, cost money, cost lives, and this is a good evidence. Why don't we think of how should things like this be taken care of? Well, there's a lot of different ways. And free markets, doctor-patient relationships, private medicine, it goes on and on, how you take care of most problems in the world. People just work it out, but not when it becomes a corporate state and corporatism runs the show and they get control of the government, then you end up with this. But this time, it looks like the continuation of this monstrous type of policy has come to an end, and this may be symbolic of a definitely change in position on where the government should stand, and maybe they would think now parents should be in charge of the medical care, not the federal government.
You know, there's an article, Dr. Paul, in the August issue of Parents Magazine, and it talks about vaccination trends. And it shows it was a study that came out from the CDC at the end of July, and they looked at the declining rates of vaccinations of children entering school. And you talked about that earlier. I was looking up the numbers here, and there really is a significant decline in the rate of vaccinations. Now, it's not our position to take a position on it, but you have to ask yourself why. Well, it's probably the CDC itself, because they've so discredited themselves by their authoritarian turn during COVID, just like all of the medical journals, Lancet, they all publish fake stuff to try to propagandize people. So people say, well, if they're going to lie about COVID, they're going to lie about 6 feet away from someone else. Well, what else are they lying about? And so they're just basically, throwing their hands up and say, we don't want any part of this. So they have themselves to blame if parents are not vaccinating their children to their liking.
And even recently, in economic terms, the economic numbers and statistics, they found out they were lying about that.
Yeah.
So it is pervasive. I now start with, it hasn't been this way all my life. It wasn't that way even when I, was called into the service. I assumed the government, would be wrong and they were imperfect and this sort of thing, and you try to give them a pass. But right now, I have to admit, I start with, if I hear an edict coming down, the higher up it goes, the less I believe in it. So if it comes from the United Nations, you might as well not even bother trying to figure it out. Why should we have to determine it? And then we look back on United Nations. What was the first thing they did? Well, they decided that in Korea there was a war going on. We'll call it a police action. If we send in the troops and have a war with many, many thousand people killed. So I think that this effort and this exposure is healthy.
Yeah, I want to thank Conrail 2020 for chipping in $20 for the show. He was talking about the peak of COVID 5 years ago and what a disaster and horrible it was, and how depressed a lot of us were, and that's an understatement. Go to that next clip. There's a little bit more about this. We don't want to beat a dead horse here, but confirmation of Monera's vaccine-obsessed views came from White House spokesman Kush Desai, who told Axios News in a statement, quote, "As her attorney statement makes abundantly clear, Susan Monera's is not aligned with the president's agenda of making America healthy again." Desai added, "Since Susan Monera's refused to resign despite informing HHS leadership of her intent to do so, the White House has terminated Monera's from her position at the CDC." Now go to the next one. Now, after she was sacked, several top officials resigned, presumably in protest. At least 4 other CDC officials resigned on Wednesday, which is yesterday. Dr. Deborah Hoorie, the CDC's chief medical officer, Dr. Dmitry Dasilauskas, director of the National Center of Immunization and Respiratory Disease, Dr. Daniel Jernigan, director of the National Center for Emergency and Zoonotic Infectious Disease, and Dr. Jennifer Layden, director of Public Health Data, Surveillance, and Technology. The big shakeup at the CDC days after Bill Gates' visit to the White House only suggests that HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s team is cleaning house, to which we can say, we can only hope
that this continue. Maybe it'll be contagious. Maybe some of these other departments will do the same thing, because I'm sure there's a lot of cleaning up that is still going to be necessary.
And here's where the real problem is. If you go to that next one, a lot of people don't understand, why is this the case? CDC's funding sources. Well, hang on. I thought it was a government agency. No. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Pfizer. You don't think they have a conflict of interest, do you, Dr. Paul?
No.
Novartis, Merck, all of the pharmaceuticals, Cargill, Procter & Gamble, the government of Canada. Why are they funding our CDC? And on it goes. Johnson & Johnson, laboratories, diagnostics. So why is the pharmaceutical and big medical and globalist organizations funding our CDC? Why aren't we? And they call it objective. I don't think so.
This made me think about, when you're living in a liberal city like Washington, D.C., and you have the liberals there who are promoting all this nonsense in schools, but if you look, they don't send their kids to the schools.
Yeah, no kidding.
I was wondering, that list of companies that are getting involved, and they do have a profit motive. And I just wonder if there could be a real good polling done on there. What are these people that run these companies? I wonder if they force all their kids to have all that, because they would be exposed to some type of information that they have to slant it one way or the other, and maybe they wouldn't be quite so anxious to give their kids. They do it in schools. They do it, and they, even when they were called on it, they don't want to blind their eye. They just go ahead and do it. But it goes to show that they're promoting stuff. If you're going to promote liberal schools and all that nonsense, you should stand up and say, yeah, they're good, and that's why we're sending our kids there.
Yeah.
But they don't do it.
No way. Well, you mentioned earlier in our segment the relationship between the pharmaceutical industrial complex and the military industrial complex. Well, I think that last slide really demonstrated it, because the CDC is funded by people who profit from disease, who profit from pharmaceuticals, just like the military industrial complex funds all of the think tanks in DC. You know, all the ones screaming for war, you scratch a little bit below the surface, it's all funded by Lockheed Martin and the warmongers. So there is this very sick, incestuous relationship we have, and it permeates our government. And someone needs to clean house enough. That's what RFK is doing, and hats off to him for doing that.
You know, a lot of people, the far left and a lot of people in the middle and on the right, they talk about preserving our democracy. And of course, the founders didn't write the Constitution to preserve or institutionalize democracy, and they do this. And I think what we're talking about, what we're complaining about, is democracy, is what happens to democracy. Get enough special interests, how many companies you have, and then they scheme it together. They probably have a little club together, and then are we going to support this candidate? And they will analyze it for a history of what to expect from them. Oh, this is just democracy, but it's democracy, in a terrible manner, because we allowed our government to be passing out and interfering in just about every social issue, war issues, and medical issue, and therefore there's a tremendous incentive, and then the money is involved. But I still bet half of them say it has to be done because we're saving lives.
Yeah, right. Well, let's move on now to another interesting story. Now, this is a trend that we've been noticing this past few months, and this is yet another new poll that confirms a real serious shift in U.S. public opinion. Now, here's a new poll that's out, taken by Quinnipiac University. Poll: 60% of Americans oppose additional military aid to Israel. 50% believe Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Now, go to the next one. So the poll asked registered U.S. voters if they support or oppose the United States sending more military aid to Israel for their efforts in the war with Hamas. 60% said they oppose that, while just 32% said they support additional military aid. This is becoming a political loser, Dr. Paul. Now, here's more from antiwar.com. Actually, this is the Quinnipiac press release. This is the highest level of opposition and lowest level of support for the United States sending more military aid to Israel since the university first asked the question to registered voters on November 2nd, 2023, in the wake of the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th. So a big decline. Now go to the next one. The poll also found that 37% of American voters are more sympathetic to the Palestinians, while 36% are more sympathetic with the Israelis. These are findings that align with the University of Maryland's critical issue poll. When we talked about that, I think yesterday, Dr. Paul, the first poll to find more U.S. sympathy for Palestinians than Israelis. The Quinnipiac poll also asked if Americans thought the U.S. was too supportive of Israel. It found that 40% of the respondents said that the U.S. is too supportive, while 42% said the support is just right. So again, Dr. Paul, we're seeing this real trend in American being really tired of this relationship, which is bringing us nothing. And I think more Americans are seeing that.
I think it's a good sign that the people in this country are getting war weary, and I think this is good, but it takes too long. We want to do what we should do is prevent the problems that are happening internationally. But I remember the 60s, the war weariness and the riots and the demonstration it took to wake up the American people to finally say enough is enough. We're coming home. And they came home, and it was a horrible mess, and lives taken unnecessarily, military and civilian. This all happened, and yet they did this, and finally it stopped when the people woke up. Same thing with Afghanistan, 20-year war there. It took all this time. They've become war weary. But right now, you might say maybe a few people woke up a little sooner because they're war weary, mainly because it's already hit home financially. People have connected the funding for the Middle East and Ukraine when people are suffering here at home. It isn't that you have to take that program and put it into a domestic program, which would be better, but it's the fact that if you quit spending that money and leave it in the hands of people, maybe they could afford, private medicine or something like that. So the financial thing now is drawing attention, and that's making them, the evidence is that people are tired of it all, and the fact that Israel is involved and the Middle East wars are involved, and Ukraine, and I think you have to search for it. But I think this whole thing is indicating that people are getting tired of it, and it's reasonable. It might even be faster than we had to do with Afghanistan and Korea and Vietnam and all these other places.
Yeah, I mean, I've often thought that non-interventionism as a principle will sort of sneak in through the back door when people are realizing how much money is being taken from them to fund the empire. So you're right to bring Ukraine into it as well. And the reason we focus on the Israel issue right now is because that's been a particularly sensitive one, where people, for a number of reasons, have continued to cling to support for that country. So if you're seeing that shift, we've already seen the views on Ukraine shift. No more money. 100 billion? No more money. So I think it's a good thing, and it's a good thing because, we would like them to be philosophically attracted to the idea of non-interventionism, but if it's if it's their purse strings or their empty wallets that motivate them, we'll take it just the same.
No, and I think this whole issue of connecting our money with the tragedies, in the Middle East or in Ukraine, most of the time, well, that's a Ukrainian problem, or that's an Israeli problem, and they don't look back into where is the money coming from. So I think this is important to connect the two, where we have a moral responsibility, and now it's a financial calamity on what's happening to our budget, and it's a source that more people should wake up. I've had a bit of encouragement, and I'm thinking that things are moving in the right direction with the last election. But I was discouraged to watch the first 8 months because we spent more money.
Yeah.
We didn't cut anything. What are we going to do about it?
We got a big, beautiful bill. Big bill. Well, I'm going to close out thanking everyone for watching the show this week. This is my last day on the program. Your favorite Friday hosts, Dr. Paul and Chris Rossini, will be on tomorrow. I'm giving it over back to you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And I, too, want to thank our viewers for tuning in today. And we look forward to the program every day. Please come back soon to the Liberty Report.